A podcast can and should be one of your most valuable business assets. When done correctly, it can also help you build your business without burning you out. In fact, your podcast should work even harder than you do. And I believe all of this so deeply that I have blazoned much of those preceding statements on the main pages of my website in the biggest, deepest burgundy font. I use it in my Instagram bio. I talk about it in the workshops and speaking engagements I lead, and I won't shut up about it to my cohorts and clients. And I'm trying to make ROT a thing, return on thinking, i.e., think once in the container of an episode like this, and then generate multiple episodes or generate multiple pieces of content for multiple platforms where you need to show up to reach your ideal client, customer, convert to your cause or membership or mission. Repurposing all this content in your podcast strategically instead of showing up to each of those platforms and constantly creating from scratch each time. But am I walking the walk and talking the talk on this deeply core belief and North Star philosophy of mine as much as I am espousing it for others? So this podcast is supposed to be me doing the things I tell you, my clients, everyone to do in order to have a podcast that builds their business without burning them out. And a big part of that is this return on thinking and repurposing. So this episode is both a response and attempt to be in alignment with the promise of this podcast and to the persistent nagging feeling I have every time I release an episode that I'm just not making it work hard enough for me. I'm not getting all of the juice out of the squeeze of making a podcast. My previous episode was all about the myth and misunderstanding of that phrase we entrepreneurs and pretty much anyone trying to improve and grow here every day, and that is consistency is key. For roughly 45 minutes, Julie Fisher and I spoke about the true meaning of consistency, which is so often and almost always conflated with constancy, being constantly on, being constantly in the feeds of your subscribers or followers or members, which is just not the vibe if you're a founder or biz owner or community leader whose plate is overflowing with obligations, to say nothing of maybe the family you're neglecting in order to do all the things you need to do to run those things. I'm also constantly and consistently, see what I did there, singing the praises of easy mode podcasting, citing podcasts like Build with Becky, or more recently, the Momentum Experiment by Kat Mullahill. Kat, if you're listening, feel free to correct my pronunciation. I might not go back and edit this again because I'm trying to do less with the editing, but I have not yet recommended my own podcast as an example of easy mode podcasting because guess what? I have not been walking the walk as much as I should. The whole put on your oxygen mask before helping others metaphor is beyond trite at this point, but boy, is it applicable here. What's unsaid in that well-worn airplane safety maxim is you're no good to others if you're unconscious. So here I am walking the walk, showing, not telling that one. I have been nearing burnout big time. I said to my husband this week after taking my kids to an Olivia Dean concert that normally the next day I would take a personal day, and that, by God, I need to be a better boss to myself. I need to give myself better instructions on how to work and live. And number two, just generally speaking, doing too many things and trying to do a podcast on top of all of them can be beyond challenging if you don't have an option C ripcord fail-safe for when things get tough. Number three, doing less, that is less video, less minutes in your episode, less editing of your episode, Courtney, does not mean that that resulting content will do less for you, and often it is quite the opposite. So, as with everything in this podcast, this episode is about me putting my own advice to the test. It's also about taking this make your podcast work harder than you do edict to a whole new level. It is meant to be intentionally simple and, dare I say, a bit revolutionary. If you've already enjoyed last week's episode, thank you. Much of what you are about to hear will sound familiar. Feel free to tune out or stick with me. I love to have you along. The reason it might sound familiar is because it is. I've taken the ideas I framed in that episode, in the intro and the outro, and expanded them a bit and sort of massaged them together in what you're about to listen to in this here solo voice note episode. Why? Well, two reasons. First, because I'm borderline obsessed with this voice note episode style. I talked about it ad nauseum at a recent workshop I led for local entrepreneurs, and I really believe it is one of the most sustainable ways and the best way to launch a podcast. So I wanted to stop just recommending other podcasts as a great example of this easy mode style and start making more of my own, both for the sake of having an example to share with you and my clients and cohorts, but also because the reason these easy mode formats exist is because we need them. We cannot do the most every single time. We cannot do the most of the time, or even a lot of the time. And the second reason is because while I've yapped endlessly in podcasts, workshops, etc., about how your podcast can fuel your entire content ecosystem, I've yet to explicitly try, wait for it, having my podcast fuel my podcast, which is to say, why not repurpose the podcast within another episode of the podcast? Snake eating its tail of a whole different magnitude. And here it comes. Challenging the status quo has been my MO for as long as I can remember. Maybe it's a Gen X thing. Maybe it's the journalist in me trained to question anything and everything that's presented as unquestionable. But whenever anyone tells me there's one right way to do something and there is one unassailable truth about the best way to do something, I immediately poke back and say, says who and why and to what end? Give me the reasons and where did this come from? Yeah, naturally, I've applied this attitude to podcasting and entrepreneurialism and business ownership and how they intermingle. Anyone who knows me or works with me knows that I am all about challenging and dismantling conventional wisdom. One of the most persistent pieces of advice and so-called conventional wisdom in this industry is consistency is key. Be consistent. If you want to get ahead, if you want to grow, be consistent. We hear it everywhere. If you want to grow your audience, you have to consistently show up for them. Your email platform tells you you'll end up in spam jail if you don't email every single week. Instagram will wave riches of engagements in front of your face at the end of each month in its insights report saying, you could have probably posted at least 4 times as many reels, maybe next month. The gym says to get those gains, bro, you got to be consistent. And I'm actually pretty sure that's true, but I wouldn't know for a fact. Podcasting, it tells you to release every single week on the same date or else what? We might catch our breath, spend some time with our family, go for a walk outside, touch grass. We might also maybe find a release cadence and rhythm that we can actually sustain longer than 90% of podcasts, which is to say those that fail. Maybe we will design a podcast around our real lives instead of rearranging our lives around a podcast. Somewhere along the way, people heard consistency is key and translated it to constancy is key. And those are not the same thing. I will probably get my dictionary out a little later, but for now, I just have to say, I do not think at all it is a coincidence that, like I said, 90% of podcasts stop publishing before episode 10. And that's because the predominant format that is force-fed to them from the moment they start thinking about making a podcast is literally called the always on format, aka release a new episode every week till death do you part. Or even more if you're a Mel Robbins or you name it, these superhuman people who are producing content every single week, multiple times a week. Side note, they're actually not superhuman so much as they have a super amount of humans around them to support them. Let's not forget that. I really wish there was more pulling back of the curtain on the productions of these podcasts that are filling up your feed. I know because I used to work on one, Meghan Markle's podcast, Archetypes. I executive produced and launched. And let me tell you, not only was there an enormous marketing budget that I would give my right arm for, there were individual teams to support every aspect of the podcast process. So it's no wonder that we come into podcasting with big dreams, maybe for big riches, big download numbers, what have you, all of which are not attainable nor really the point for people who are trying to get their voice out to getting more business or getting more amplification of their thought leadership so that they can get more speaking gigs or try out ideas for a book that will eventually get them on those big stages. And being constantly on is just not sustainable for really anyone who doesn't have the full support of a Spotify-sized budget. The consistency is key advice is born out of the need to stand out and be top of mind for our audiences who are, we assume, buried in 8 trillion podcasts. And the numbers just do not match the imagination of what that competition is really like. Yes, being reliably present to the people you've invited into your thought leadership is key when you want resonance with them. But those 8 trillion podcasts that we're competing against for the attention of our ideal clients and consumers are actually more realistically like 8 podcasts. And I'm not even kidding here. The typical podcast consumer listens to about 3 podcasts a week, and the hyper big time voracious consumer of podcasts, I'm raising my hand, audio episode, you can't tell, it's closer to 8, maybe more, but we are the exception, not the rule. And the real irony here is,
Small podcaster note here. This is where I am interrupted by my husband and dog as if just to prove I have a lot going on right now.
I am recording an episode before I go to Charlotte tomorrow, and I didn't want to have to edit it. Love you. Do you need me right now? Okay, bye. Love you. I really didn't want to have to edit this one. It's just a solo. I'm on a roll. The irony here is 2 things. One, my husband and my dog just interrupted me, and I bet Stephen Bartlett would never. And also that the real competition here is both with our own stamina and our own schedules. The stamina that is required to keep a podcast alive is eroded, not supported by this be consistent, be always on, or be irrelevant advice. True consistency is found in a podcast strategy that supports you and your obligations and your pets and family, not the other way around. This episode is about giving ourselves permission to go against the so-called truths that we accept without question and to see if there might be a better way to show up that feels truer to our goals. And it's permission to call BS on be consistent. And no, I don't literally dislike consistency. I dislike how it's been widely misinterpreted to be more aligned with hustle culture, no pain, no gain, go big, go home vibes that are counterproductive and misaligned with the goals of podcasts like mine and presumably yours. So let's do a little forensic side quest on this consistency is key advice. The weekly at minimum publishing edict was a response to the flawed / non-existent algorithms on traditional podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, a way to essentially kind of game the system of those platforms, which is to show up by means of recency in people's feeds. Those not even algorithms, it's not right to call them, but basically feeds favor recency and consistency. Now that YouTube has entered the chat, SEO strategies for getting discovered are a real big part of things. That's a whole other episode. In fact, I did talk about it with Annika Jackson. If you want to go look at my feed, publishing frequently was a way to build an audience that will contribute to a direct new revenue stream. That strategy is primarily for podcasters who are looking to be the next Mel Robbins, Amy Poehler, Joe Rogan. I feel like I should bleep that name. That, which is to say, people who will make direct dollars from their podcast. That's when the size of the consistency of the audience matters. When you are someone who's using your podcast as a place to house your body of work and thought leadership and expertise, like I've said, I've sent potential clients an episode. I often post my episodes in my circle community for my cohorts. Hey, we were talking about this today in the cute. Let's hear what my guest that week had to say about it. Or not even that week, I'll go back into the archives and say, we were talking about how podcasts are great for building relationships. Go back to episode, let's call it 6, with Greg Wasserman and see what we had to say there. It's not about breaking news or what we're doing now or being on top of it and what is the latest meme. It's about this body of work that is going to last over the long haul, we hope, if we keep our stamina and take care of our rhythms in a way that match our energy. For people like us, where podcast is an indirect revenue engine, prioritizing consistency, which is to say, following the advice that we hear as be consistent and interpreting it as be constant and frequent and forever, always be publishing on our podcast is not only misguided, but it's to the detriment of running the business that is our actual revenue driver, our business. So I recommend for our flavor of podcasting, the indirect revenue, client generating, lead generation, top of funnel, call it what you will, expertise led podcasting. A better word is publish on a reliable cadence. And even that is open to interpretation. Those of you who've been following my podcast for a while, trying to figure out exactly what day Courtney often releases on. Jury's still out, guys. It's when time allows, basically. I am on a probably on average every 8-9 day release schedule, which I gotta pat myself on the back for. I'm mostly doing it alone. I have some talented editors I've been trying out and learning about, but all the rest is up to me. Let's just say the goal is to be someone your audience knows they'll hear from and get value from with some level of regularity, but not someone who's required to operate like an always-on robot. Now to the dictionary portion of the episode. Stick with me. This is where my teenage children will usually cringe and walk slowly out of the room, but I do love me a good dictionary definition. So here we go. This kind of blew my mind when I read it in the context of, I read it as I was creating the episode with Julie Fisher, because I was like, ugh, why do we think that consistency means always see? Not a word, but you know what I mean. It blew my mind. I pulled it out, and one definition of consistency, the one that I'm kind of mind blown about, is the way in which a substance holds together. Holds together, guys. As in the opposite of falling apart, pod fading, throwing in the towel because it's just too much to be always on. That's the kind of consistency I'm interested in, and I'm going to campaign to have it replace the other kind that we hear about. But just as a little side note, I don't think anyone knows this definition I came across too. It actually, I think, was above the holds together version. Here's this other one. The achievement of a level of performance that does not vary greatly in quality over time. I kid you not. When I read it, I was like, I'm sorry, what now? I thought I was being punked because wow, if that's what consistency actually is, definitely count me out. I don't want my work to stay exactly the same over time. I hope next year's episodes, first of all, are still releasing because I am honoring the stamina that I can handle for producing these, but also because I'm learning and growing and changing and maybe hearing from you guys about topics and formats that are interesting to you and you want me to take on. And I hope I evolve and change because lack of variance over time sounds like a dictionary definition of boring. Holding together is, on the other hand, a much more worthy goal. And some days I'm closer to achieving it than others. So this is my attempt to hold it together. Life has been doing a lot of lifing lately. What I always say is it's better to show up somehow than not show up at all. I have in bright red font in one of my launch roadmap guides that I deliver to my cohorts for my launch programs, more on that to come, is, okay, wait, at this point, if you're freaking out, pull the ripcord, scroll ahead to easy mode. And this week, I came dangerously close to being a pod fade adjacent statistic, at least for this week. I came dangerously close to saying, F it, I'm just not going to show up because I'm also off to Charlotte for the Empowered Podcasting Conference. It is happening imminently, as is my podcasting, as is my talk on the ROI of podcasting. No surprise there. But then, of course, as often happens, a little voice inside my head, the Courtney inside my head, said, oh, wait, what would you tell your clients? What would you tell your cohorts? You would tell them, do one of those voice note episodes. If you don't feel like getting the whole video operation up and going this week, that's great. That's what podcasting honestly was made to be, is your voice in the ear of the people who could benefit from hearing from you. So rather than saying F it indefinitely, here I am, doing this voice note. And I highly recommend you do the same if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. And God, please don't promise to show up every Tuesday, but if you have and Tuesday comes and goes and you have not released an episode, it's better to show up on Thursday or Friday or next Monday than not at all. But truly do not publicly declare that you are going to show up at a particular day or time until you are absolutely certain that that feels right for you. Because even though no one will be setting their watch on your podcast release schedule, you will be setting yourself back mentally because you'll be like, oh, I didn't do it. I'm a failure. Or maybe you're not just like me, but I've heard a lot of that and I'm here to show you a better way. Maybe you do like Julie Fisher, my last guest on this show that I am borrowing from right now, and instead commit to a biweekly cadence. If you do need that sort of accountability of a release schedule, then pick one that is much less taxing on your energy and say every other week. Or maybe you do like my client, Bill Groner. I helped him launch the podcast, The Connection Effect, and guess what? And I had to give him a little eating of crow. I said, Bill, guess what? I know I told you you have to publish every week. And granted, his goals are sort of adjacent to those of people looking to get direct revenue from their podcast. He is a nonprofit founder. But I said to him, Bill, you don't have to publish every week. But what he did, instead of having an interview episode every week, he has every other week what he calls an after show, where they sort of unpack what happened in that episode, which is sort of what this was meant to be in a solo format. But he brings in a couple of his colleagues and they pick apart and respond to and react to what came up in the previous week's episode. So here's me, teacher, learning from the student. I am humble. I know there's always ways to change, and often if they are in support of keeping yourself going, then they are worth exploring. Point is, just as the podcast format itself, I'm always saying, is malleable and not every snowflake version, and by that I mean fingerprint, no two are alike, has yet been explored. I hear about new ones almost every day. So too is the way in which you release your podcast. Your podcast release schedule can change with the person who's putting it out. It doesn't have to follow a specific rhythm or rule. I beg you, build the podcast that helps you build and not burn out. Do not force superhuman discipline where it serves little to no purpose and can be actually detrimental. Give yourself options like alternate formats, easy mode, give yourself leeway, and build systems that help you keep going when you feel like fading out. To paraphrase Julie Fisher from our conversation in the last episode, create escape routes so you can get off the hustle bus when and where you need to. Podcasting does not have to be an extreme solo sport. And on that note, I have seen such incredible results come from the cohort-based podcast small group programs that I've led. And if any of the preceding had you reconsidering a podcast idea you'd maybe given up on or put off indefinitely, this next part is for you. I have just this week begun accepting applications for my brand new, overhauled, and enhanced 6-week done with you small group program, the Strategic Podcast Launch Studio. It is the culmination of the best parts of my previous podcast launch cohorts. The Strategic Podcast Launch Studio cohort has plenty of easy mode options woven in for you to learn and have in your toolbox, and it is designed to ensure you walk away from those 6 weeks with a real life podcast that's designed to work harder than you do. And right now, I'm personally inviting well-aligned folks to apply. And if you have listened to this long and you haven't tuned out, I'm guessing you probably fit the bill. So send me an email and we'll find out. It's Courtney@soundsgreatstrategy.com. I'd love to hear what you're grappling with and see if, insert pharmaceutical ad voice here, the Strategic Podcast Launch Studio is right for you. And if nothing else, I hope today's little experiment inspires you to re-examine your podcast philosophy or life philosophy, or take a second look at these edicts that are handed to you as the one and only true and best way to do things. And I hope that you consider your podcast, if you have one already, as a business asset that can work a lot harder for you. And it's not a treadmill stuck on the steepest incline. All right. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being here while I talk the talk and walk the walk a little bit more every day. See you, or maybe just speak to you again next time.